Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of a high ranking American cardinal. Perhaps it could be argued the highest ranking American cardinal, highest profile. And it did bring a lot of questions because Francis has the authority to not accept it and just let the person continue serving if they are capable of doing so. There are no indications that, in this case, Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston was not capable. When a cardinal or a bishop hits the age of 75, they are required to submit their resignation to Rome. And they typically, if they are on good terms with Francis, will have their resignation not really accepted. There'll be no response to it, meaning they can keep serving until the Pope responds. That happened recently with Cardinal Supich, who hit age 75 in Chicago. He submitted his letter as canon law requires and never got a response. His birthday is, I believe, the Feast of St. Joseph during Lent. And so Cardinal Supich still serves. At the age of 80, they can no longer serve or participate in a conclave, but strictly speaking, the Pope can keep them in their diocese for as long as they're capable of serving. Cardinal Malley hit the age of 80 and was gone, replaced by a bishop who had barely been a bishop for very long at all, which raised a few eyebrows. So we're going to talk about this a little bit today because this is an incredibly big shakeup in the American church. It cannot be understated how influential Cardinal Sean O'Malley was. He was a voice of reason during the Ted McCarrick problems in the 90s, leading to the blowup of all of it in 2003. In fact, that's why he became the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, is because he was widely viewed as the only person in the episcopate who had the courage to do the things necessary to stop the problems there, because his two predecessors in Boston were alleged to have done McCarrick kinds of things themselves. And I'm a little suspicious about his being accepted. Perhaps there's some things in his letter that we don't know about, health-related things or something that caused him to be accepted. But there are a couple things that happened in the last few years that make it to give plausibility to the possibility that this was political. Now, regardless, whatever else you might think, pray for Cardinal Sean O'Malley. That having been said, let's go first to the basics of the story before we dive into a couple of the things that I've noticed. So, this comes from cruxnow.com, who professes to be taking the Catholic pulse. Crux is based out of Boston, by the way. The headline is O'Malley steps down in Boston, Henning of Providence to take over. Congratulations to soon-to-be Archbishop Henning, formerly of Providence. That is a massive promotion. Again, Boston is historically, for very obvious reasons, one of the most prestigious sees in the United States. Not quite as prestigious as Baltimore, which is the preeminent see in the United States. It's why the bishops meet there annually. It's like the first see in the United States. But Boston is very prestigious in its own right. This is just going to give you the basics of the story before we start diving into some of the odd things that were happening just before this happened that I think are heavily influential. So, from the article, capping more than 20 years as one of American Catholicism's most influential leaders, Cardinal Sean O'Malley's tenure as the Archbishop of Boston ended Monday as the Vatican announced Pope Francis has accepted his resignation and named Bishop Richard Henning of Providence as his successor. Henning now becomes a metropolitan archbishop with direct authority over Boston and an indirect supervisory role over 6 other dioceses in Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. For those who don't know, archbishops kind of help the bishops of the non-archdioceses around the regular dioceses that are generally in their immediate area. How large of an area of influence depends on how things are set up by Rome, but they help them with some things, with the governance of their diocese if they need it. Although, as I understand it, most of the time there's not a lot of assistance needed there most of the time. The Vatican's August 5th statement confirmed rumors first reported by Rocco Palmo, a veteran Catholic writer, indicating that O'Malley, who turned 80 earlier this summer and is no longer able to vote in the next conclave, was retiring and being replaced by Henning. A Capuchin Franciscan, O'Malley has served as the Archbishop of Boston since 2003. Prior to Boston, he served as a Bishop of St. Thomas in the American Virgin Islands, then as Bishop of Fall River, Massachusetts, and then as Bishop of Palm Beach, Florida. Speaking idiomatically fluent Spanish, O'Malley has long had a reputation for his work with and advocacy on behalf of new arrivals and the impoverished, having served various communities of such. YouTube has rules about talking about even this issue at all, so got to be careful. He's also well known for his efforts to advance child protection, having taken over in Boston for Cardinal Bernard Law, who resigned in 2002 amid the fallout of the Ted McCarrick problems, including allegations of hiding it, that exploded in the United States after the massive expose by the Boston Globe, leading the entire national church to adopt sweeping reform of safeguarding policies. And Cardinal O'Malley was rather central to those policies being implemented. So that is, one of the reasons he is such an important figure in the American church. I do have a few hangups with him. We'll get to that here, though. But let's talk about Bishop Henning, because you're about to see he has potential to be a power player. Now, a Boston outlet repeated most of what I just said, but they also give some here on Bishop Henning, rather. So he says, they're quoting him directly. He says, "I think my first priority has to be to listen, I don't think I should come in with the answers. I'm new here to New England, and I've been spending the last year learning in Rhode Island, so I don't know much yet about Massachusetts or Boston," Henning said. "I think the first year really has to be about visiting, listening, learning before I can start setting priorities." Comes from Rockville, New York. He was ordained a priest of the Diocese of Rockville Center in May of 1992. He was coadjutor bishop of Providence and then assumed the governance of the diocese in May of 2023. So he's been a bishop and he has been the ordinary of a diocese for barely a year. He will remain apostolic administrator there until his installation in Boston, October 31st. So, yeah, he says his keys in Providence were evangelization, whatever that means these days. His answer does remind me of synodality a little bit, which kind of not exactly great, but this dialoguing and listening stuff. The USCCB had their own press release. It doesn't exactly say much. That Cardinal Christophe Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio, was the one who communicated, was the go-between, and tell you a little bit about Boston, but nobody cares about that. I want to talk about here something. There's a couple details that kind of go to this, and I'll preface it by saying this. Something has actually always bothered me a little bit about Cardinal O'Malley, and it's this. He's one of, if not the highest profile bishop in the United States, it can be argued. He says all the right things about the Ted McCarrick problem in the church. He has, without question, taken good leadership on that position, at least as good as is possible, short of publicly demanding all James Martin types be expelled from the priesthood and barring their entry into the seminary. That is what you need to have to solve this problem, because we know that unequivocally this is a problem of men with James Martin type inclinations in the priesthood having access to all the things that they did and doing everything they did, and then the bishops hiding it. Short of taking the needed step of expelling all those kinds of men from the priesthood, he's been on the right side of this stuff for the most part, though there is at least one allegation that he didn't respond appropriately to some allegations in his diocese. I always take those with a grain of salt until it's proven, because there are bad actors out there who are opportunists who have tried to sue individual dioceses over alleged things that didn't actually happen. It's been proven that is the case a few times. And they do that because those lawsuits turn into giant paydays for anyone making the allegation. It's not hard to pull that off at all, because the Catholic Church rarely, if ever, gets a fair shake in our culture. So always take those allegations you hear with a grain of salt until actual evidence is brought forth. But what has always bothered me is that when you have the stature of being the Cardinal Archbishop of a city like Boston, you have to lead, and more than just on that one issue. You have to be more than just a local ordinary in your diocese. You have to speak in defense of the church as befitting a man of your stature. For example, Bishop Strickland was rather noteworthily alone at Dodger Stadium last year. It would have been wonderful if Cardinal O'Malley could have lent his stature to that. It would be wonderful if Cardinal O'Malley could have stood with the bishops who were, we'll say, resisting Traditionis Custodes. It would have been great if Cardinal O'Malley could have stood up and publicly rejected some of the errors coming from Rome. Didn't really do those things. Part of that is because, as you'll find out, Cardinal O'Malley was on the Council of Nine Cardinals of Pope Francis. And that's kind of the problem here. He was very, very, very unequivocally good on one critically important thing in our time, and credit where it's due. But he remained silent. And we're going to say remained because that's what makes this story weird. It suddenly changed a couple months ago when he started speaking out about the Marco Rupnik mess. If you are not familiar with the Marco Rupnik situation, or you've somehow forgotten about him, Father Marco Rupnik is a priest who used to be a Jesuit until the Jesuits kicked him out for being absolutely evil. He coerced nuns into violating their vows of chastity, and they violated those vows with him. He incurred automatic excommunication by using his priestly authority to absolve them of their sins that they incurred when they violated the 6th and 9th commandments with him. And when explicitly says in the Code of Canon Law, and has been the position of the church going back to antiquity, that if a priest does something evil and gets other people to do something evil with him, and then he uses his authority as a priest to absolve them of their sins for that evil thing that he got them to do, he incurs automatic excommunication himself. Rupnik also used the altar the Mass is set on, as well as the chalice used for the Mass, in unspeakably evil ways with these nuns while they were violating their vows with him. And I would give you more details than that, but decency demands that I don't do that. Plus, honestly, I can't even bring myself to vocalize, to bring the words to my mouth in private in a more, we'll say, upfront and explicit manner, describing what he did with Mass implements, because they are literally unspeakably evil acts. I can't bring myself to say them. And it's all bad enough. But if you forgot, Pope Francis lifted the excommunication of Marco Rupnik and allowed him to go back to making his diabolical artwork and being a priest who is on paper incarnated in his home country of Slovakia, but still works out of Rome at the art institute he founded. And for some reason, his artwork keeps getting promoted by the Vatican. Many places say they refuse to do anything about his artwork. It came out in the news this week that a defender of his who has a bunch of his artwork in some cathedral or basilica somewhere in the church decried the cancel culture around Marco Rupnik, trying to get him canceled for these allegations and to have his artwork removed. They decried it as cancel culture. Tone deaf, absolutely tone deaf. O'Malley started speaking out about this a month or so ago. So now we go here to the National Catholic Register for this headline. Cardinal O'Malley speaks clearly on Father Rupnik's art, telling the Vatican, say no more. The Boston Cardinal speaks on the subject of this problem. Everyone in the church should listen. This was June 28th. Earlier in the summer, he hit retirement age. He could, judging from, by all accounts, everything, he could probably keep serving in his position. There is a shortage of bishops in the church right now. And many have noted how weird it is that Bishop Henning went from being a bishop in Providence, Rhode Island for barely a year to now being the ordinary of one of the most, if not the most important see in all of the United States. And I kind of wonder if this has something to do with it. See, the Vatican has a problem. They acknowledge that the allegations are probably real to the point that Francis lifted the statute of limitations on investigating these decade-old allegations, though nothing has come from that and it's been more than a year now. They know that the Catholic world is outraged by the continued use of Rupnik's evil-looking art, and yet they continue to use his art in Rome in high-profile basilicas and cathedrals worldwide. The Vatican, to put it simply, can't quit Rupnik, and that's partially because Rupnik has personal friends in very high places in Rome, including in charge of the Vatican's communication services, and they are clearly protecting him. Plus, there's that whole Jesuit network in the Roman Curia that has been a problem, reportedly, since Vatican II. Okay, that's the reality of the situation. But let's go take a look here at this story, because Cardinal O'Malley started speaking on this 6 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. Consider it one of the last signal service from one who has spent several decades serving the church in the sewer of the Ted McCarrick problem. Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, president of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, wrote June 26 to the heads of all dicasteries in the Roman Curia, advising that pastoral prudence should prevent displaying artwork in a way that could either imply either exoneration or a subtle defense of alleged perpetrators of bad things, or indicate indifference to the pain and sufferings of so many harmed by it. In genteel curial style, the letter was sent to everyone to disguise that it had an audience of one. Paolo Ruffini, head of the Vatican Communications Office, just days earlier in Atlanta, Ruffini gave a bewildering defense of his department's continued use of Father Marco Repnick's artwork on its website. The Register's editorial Tuesday took issue with his dicastery's conspicuous use of Father Repnick's art, because whatever the motivations inside the Vatican, it appears to the outside world as shockingly tone deaf and indefensible in light of the Church's long struggle with the Ted McCarrick problem, including a variation of it that involves adults. Ruffini's views and judgment have been subject to savage criticism. No Roman official has yet come to his defense. Now Cardinal O'Malley has pronounced his judgment regarding Father Repnick's work in Vatican publications, electronic or otherwise. No more. Despite Cardinal O'Malley speaking for a great many observers, the Dicastery for Communication used Father Repnick's Art Friday for the saint of the day. Yeah, I remember when that happened. When Cardinal O'Malley speaks on this subject, everyone has to listen, even the Holy Father. Recall that in 2018, Pope Francis visited Chile, the most disastrous papal trip in recent memory. In a country reeling from its own Ted McCarrick problem involving one of its most prominent priests, the Holy Father made it worse with his callous comments, sparking an international uproar. In an exceedingly rare move for a senior cardinal, Cardinal O'Malley publicly rebuked Pope Francis. Quoting him directly, "It is understandable that Pope Francis's statements yesterday in Santiago, Chile, were a source of great pain for those who survived the Ted McCarrick problem or any other who do such things. Words that convey the message, if you cannot prove your claims, then you will not be believed. Abandon those who have suffered reprehensible criminal violations of their human dignity and relegate survivors to discredited exile." That is a severe rebuke of the man whose Council of Nine Cardinals he sits on. Okay. And he said this publicly. That did not entirely put out the conflagration the Holy Father had started in Chile, but it did bring some measure of comfort. No other cardinal had the credibility to speak as Cardinal O'Malley did. That credibility is again evident in the Father Repnick mess. Sean O'Malley was appointed bishop 40 years ago. Yada, yada, yada. We talked about this. He came to the forefront during this problem. He says, but because precisely Cardinal O'Malley was the only one the firemen brought back to Boston less than a year later, as a venerable archdiocese was in virtual inferno. That's because, again, both of his predecessors in Boston had credible accusations against them of the Ted McCarrick problem. For more than 20 years, Cardinal O'Malley, a Capuchin friar, has fulfilled in Boston what St. Francis first heard in Assisi: repair my church. Get the idea. He has a history of upsetting the powers that be on this subject. And I kind of wonder if the reason his was accepted this time at the age of 80, even though he's appears by all measures to be more than healthy and more than fit and capable of continuing to lead that diocese in a time when there is a lack of priests willing to be bishops, it does sort of make you wonder if him speaking out 6 weeks ago about the Repnick mess influenced this decision. Because remember, Francis has a reputation. He protects Jesuits, does so at all costs. He also has a reputation of protecting men like Repnick and men like McCarrick until the pressure gets so great that he can't. And here we are a year later, still talking about Repnick because they reopened an investigation into him and reported that there was nothing to report on yet a year later. Meanwhile, all you have to do is look at the excommunication of Archbishop Vigano, and you see how quickly they can move when they're motivated to. Let's take a look here in the live comments here before we wrap this up. So please pray for Cardinal O'Malley. His is not a position I would want to be in. But he is now, maybe being retired, he is now fully able to speak freely. So we should take a look with what happens. Yeah, I always get Slovenia and Slovakia confused. Sorry, Drago. Rupnik is incarnated in Slovenia, not Slovakia. I always get those two confused. Me being an American, I always get those confused. I try to do it from memory. Yeah, it's the Jesuits. It's always the Jesuits. That's the problem. That's why people always talk about how the Jesuits need to be suppressed. O'Malley's one of the. Well, okay, Alan. I mean, he's diabolic disorientation is in the church, and I'm not a sedevacantist. Hope there's never been a confusion about that. I'm not a sedevacantist, but I do think that this is what we're dealing with: is that he spoke the truth in a way that, or although there's a distinct possibility that there is something else in the behind the scenes that's just not public yet that motivated this, such as health issues or something. I mean, after all, Cardinal O'Malley is 80. So, but if he is of sound body and sound mind and able to continue serving the church, personally, I'm old fashioned. That's why I'm a traditionalist, that bishops and cardinals should serve until they are physically incapable of doing so. Same with priests. Too many priests and too many bishops are retired when they can do many other things. Perhaps Cardinal O'Malley was hedging his bets. Maybe. Perhaps. Yeah, Michael Glowacki asks that you like the video, and I will also say that. So please hit the like on that if you can. It does greatly help. There's no other thoughts in the live chat, so we're going to wrap this up. Please pray for Cardinal O'Malley. Pray that the work he has done in the much needed work he did in Boston continues under the new bishop. Pray for Bishop Henning. I mean, again, I wouldn't want to be a bishop who has only 1 year of experience as an ordinary of a relatively small diocese, suddenly put into the Archdiocese of Boston. He'll need your prayers. So please pray for him and anybody else we spoke about today, especially anybody who stirs up negative feelings internally in you. It's not what we're here for. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.